Continue to cover the legacy of the late former Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe. Looking into his life and times, we have now in studio with us ANC spokesperson Pule Mabe. Good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Afternoon to your viewers.
Now, we're talking about a leader who many say he embodied Africa's struggle against colonialism. The ANC's reaction to his passing?
Well, we have received the news this morning and had conveyed our condolences to the family of President Robert Mugabe, his wife, children, and the people of Zimbabwe, including his organization, one that he has been a part of throughout his entire life, the ZANU-PF, because we believe that the contribution that he has made towards the liberation of Zimbabwe can be watered down. He has been part of what was known as the Second Chimurenga in the 1960s and 1970s, which ultimately brought down the nonsensical Iron Smith Rhodesian regime and ultimately produced the Lancaster House Agreement of 1979, which saw President Mugabe himself ascend to become one of Africa's longest democratically elected president. But also, here at home, he was part of the formative years of the ANC Youth League, having participated in activities of the ANC Youth League when the Youth League was adopting, amongst others, what was to be known as a program of action, which program of action led to radicalizing the approach that the ANC was using to undertake the liberation of the people of South Africa. So there are similarities between the struggle of the people of Zimbabwe and our own advancement of national liberation in this country.
Yeah.
He comes from Fort Hare. He's a trained teacher himself. He was an engineer, well educated and quite vested. But the most significant thing that he did for the people of Zimbabwe was that during his tenure as president, he introduced a ministry that was dedicated to the empowerment of his people. And that ministry was called the Department of Indigenization. It was through these efforts that he would continue to drive forward programs of land reform and all of that. Ourselves, even when we were in the leadership of the ANC Youth League, part of the visits we undertook was to go to Zimbabwe to understand how they had advanced their own cause of national liberation and how their structures are quite organized. I must say to you, Palisa, that it has been quite a telling experience to look at how they've organized their own financial services sector, how they ensured that those tobacco farms are owned by Africans, black people in particular in that country, and allowing them to participate in the mainstream of the economy there. So there's quite a lot of things to learn.
Yeah.
Which some could contribute. I mean, he was an activist for social justice himself. He was an advocate of national unity himself. He had encouraged whites in Zimbabwe to stay in that country and contribute towards a program of reconstruction and development.
I just want to go back to the issue of land. A lot of people really praising him for his stance on land and believing that land should go back to the black people in that country. Some are saying that that land program was very catastrophic. So you talk about lessons learned. Let's just dwell a bit into that. What is it that the ANC and the governing party, what does it take from that particular program, which many say that it actually led Zimbabwe to where it is now economically?
Well, Palesa, just as a preface, the relationship that we enjoy with countries like Zimbabwe and organizations like ZANU-PF, it's quite sacrosanct in the sense that we do not go in to want to tamper with their own sovereignty, because we wouldn't want the same done to South Africa. Of course, we've got to look at what worked. For instance, one of the things that I know that has been coming up as it relates to the land reform program of Zimbabwe has been the whole issue of security of tenure, allowing ordinary people to have something called a title deed. You would know that their land reform program was such that government would effectively be the custodian of property, which might have had its own challenges, including not allowing ordinary people to be using that property as collateral. So those are some of the things that you could learn. Now, what is it that you can do? Well, on land reform, we all agree. Perhaps what we might be advancing differently is what must constitute the end. how do we constitute a land reform program in a manner that it still places the resource, what you call collateral. I mean, if I went and owned land in the villages, which I am unable to use to borrow against, it really does not allow me to produce value. Now, our struggle, the one that we're advancing on land reform, is such that land should still sit at the same value that it is sitting, even when it is in Sandton, owned by people of a different color. It should still attract the same value even when it was owned by Palesa, in Limpopo, anywhere else in the country.
Yeah. So he's also been really been said he is someone who stood up against the colonizers previously.
Yes.
People saying that he's a revolutionarist.
Correct.
But some saying that he's a tyrant. How do you think he'll be remembered?
Well, I think that if we put everything aside and are fair to ourselves, we would all agree that President Mugabe is an ardent revolutionary himself. He had championed the cause for national liberation. If there is a project that is difficult to undertake, it's something called national liberation. Here in South Africa, when we advanced national liberation and went to form government in 1994, we had to make certain concessions. We still had to leave people of color with something called water rights. If you go to farms, there are farms in this country where people of color still own something called water rights, when you and I, who come from townships and villages, don't have the same privileges. These concessions were made as part of undertakings towards national liberation. So a project called national liberation is not a simple project. The fact that he himself, as a leader of the Organization of African Unity at the time, had advanced a program that ensures that we make Africa open for all and work with people regardless of their skin color to work on constructing an Africa that we could all call home. I mean, you would remember what he said during the conference on sustainable development held here on South African soil, when he said Europe for Europeans and Zimbabwe for Zimbabweans. In short, meaning that Africa for Africans, and that the Africans, as per the words of Kwame Nkrumah in the late 1950s, that Africans are the best champions of their own destination. President Mugabe has effectively lived to that reality. What the people of Zimbabwe and all of us could be doing, especially in the spate of what we saw this week as xenophobic attacks, is that in celebrating Mugabe, Sankara, Kwame Nkrumah, Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, and many others who were great African leaders, we can only do so by holding dear to the unity of our people.
All right.
Making sure that we use our collective wisdoms to make sure that Africa has got currency, both in land and in terms of the resources we need to generate jobs, to fight the scourge of disease, to develop the skills we need to be able to turn Africa around.
All right, Mr. Mabe, we'll leave it at that for today. Thank you so much for coming through.
Oh, thank you.
That's the ANC's spokesperson, Pule Mabe, giving reaction to the passing of the former Zimbabwe president, Robert Mugabe.